Rhino piercings, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Going to give you 5 of each from a piercer. Also, we're going to talk about what you should know beforehand, the piercing experience, healing the piercing, jewelry, living with the piercing, and, hey, what happens if you decide you don't want it anymore? Coming up next on Pros and Cons by Piercer and Everything Else, Season 2, Episode number 40. So you might want to just stick around. For those that are new to the channel, first off, welcome to the channel. Hope you're enjoying the videos. Hoping you're finding them helpful. But if this is the first one, you might not know who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So the piercing I'm going to talk about today is the Rhino piercing. Now, this is a piercing that's extremely rare. I think I've only seen 1 or 2 of these in my 27 years of piercing. And I've never done one, but I get asked a lot about this particular piercing, I think because it kind of piques people's interest. Not necessarily that they want to get it done, but the more they're interested in it. And I've had requests to do this video off and on for the last 3 or 4 years I've been on YouTube. So why not? Let's go ahead and do one. For those who don't know what it is a vertical piercing done through the tip or the Major Alar Cartilage or apex of the nose. It's done vertically, usually done with a curved barbell. They can be done deeper and more up and down, usually done with a straight or standard barbell. As far as the history of this thing, the origins are kind of a little hazy. There is some hints that it might be something that was done in South American and African cultures. I couldn't find any information that could back that up. It's one of those parts of the body that I'm sure somebody prior to the 2000s thought of it. But for the most part, it's one of those piercings that kind of came about in the 2000s to 2010s. Not very common, not widespread, and unusual. So let's get on to the pros, the advantages, the things that make you say, hey, that's the one for me. Starting with number 1, this piercing, if I haven't expressed this already, it's rare. It's not one you're going to see every day. It's definitely something that's unique, different. You're not going to come across 5 or 6 people at the local hardcore show with this particular piercing. This is one of those things that if you have it, people are going to notice because they've probably never seen it before. Number 2, it heals. Unlike a lot of experimental or extreme piercings, this one does have a history of healing. A lot of times when you're talking about piercings like this, like the or the surface trachea or some of that stuff, or anti-eyebrows, they can heal, but they're also prone to rejection and migration and other problems. This one, for the most part, seems to be something that can heal with little or no issue. It does have a long healing period, and we'll get to that later, but this is one you can actually heal out, and I would be willing to do. That moves us on to number 3. This one is, because of the style of jewelry you're using, curved barbells, you have a large variety of different types of ends that you can put in there. Lots of different styles you can go for, from the traditional Rhino, because they're going for that Rhino horn look, the cones or spikes, to ornate jewelry, to gem settings, to all kinds of fun stuff. So you're kind of out there. You can do all kinds of things with this, and this is a piercing that you could have for a long period of time and kind of change the look of it as your mood changes or your styles change. Number 4, this one's going to draw a lot of attention to you in your nose. Because it's so rare, it's going to be a definite conversation starter. You are going to meet a lot of people that you probably wouldn't have met without having this piercing. It's just not common. People are going to see it, they're going to comment on it, and they're going to either love it or they're going to not love it. If you're one of those people that doesn't like attention, this may not be the piercing for you. Number 5, this one's kind of something that I don't think a lot of people are brought up, but it's not inside the nostril. Since I think one of the more common questions I get with septum piercings, nostril piercings, etc., is I have sinus problems. Is it going to be affected? Is it going to affect the piercing? No, it usually doesn't. But if you're really, really one of those people that is concerned about it, this piercing is not inside your nostril. It's not going to affect breathing. It's not going to affect the flow of nostril juices, snot, and it's not going to have stuff collect on it. So it's a little bit, I guess that's a pro for some people. Before I move on to the cons, if you like this, give us a thumbs up, share it with other people. If you haven't already, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're notified every single time I post something. Not you, me, or us. If you have a question or you'd like to add to the conversation, or you have one of these and you'd like to share your experience, please make a comment. People do read those, and it is part of the community here that we're trying to build. Now it's time to move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things that make us go, nope, not for me. Starting with number 1, it can be extremely hard to find a piercer that has done one of these, especially in North America. It is just not a common piercing. Most piercers are not going to list this on their piercings they do. This is not a piercing that is easy to find somebody that is going to be like, oh yeah, let's go back and do it. And to a degree, you need to be kind of leery of someone that immediately agrees to it. They should discuss things with you and go through a consultation and talk about, and they should very much be very plain and forward and about how much experience they have doing this piercing. It's one of those things, if somebody came in and talked to me about it, we'd probably do a consultation. I would tell them, hey, why don't you think about it? If you still want to get it, we'll go ahead and do it in a couple days and give it a shot. It's not something that I'm going to be like, oh yeah, come on back, let's do it. It's definitely something I want to have a conversation with somebody in depth about issues, problems, concerns, long before I actually do it. Number 2, this thing takes a long time to heal, anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks or months, not weeks, months. So you're looking at a healing time that's going to last anywhere from a year or half a year to a full year. You should be prepared for that. It shouldn't be something that surprises you. And unlike other nostril piercings, which can usually heal out in about 2 to 4 months, or septum piercings or other nose piercings, this one is going to take a long time to heal and is going to need you to make that commitment to heal it out. Number 3, scarring. This is on the tip of your nose. It is going to be something that's very visible. It's something people are going to notice right away. If you have scarring on the tip of your nose, either because something went wrong during the healing process or just the indentation scar that's left once you remove the jewelry, people are going to know that you have it or had it. Number 4, this piercing can be a bit on the painful side. It's more painful in a way than a nostril. It's kind of the same type of cartilage, but it's a very long and thick piercing. So it's going to be more prone to that issue of being uncomfortable. Number 5, it's extremely hard to isolate the tip of your nose. You don't realize how often you touch it, move it, bump it into things, bump it into other people, depending on your level of intimacy. And it is out there on the front of your face, and it's the first thing that comes in contact with everything if you walk into it. So it can be a very difficult piercing to isolate for that reason. Septums, not so much so. Nostrils, not so much so. Maybe the mantis piercings, yes, they would be kind of in that same vein. But this one definitely is going to be one of those piercings that's going to get caught on things, clothing, shirts, everything, and is going to get bumped a lot. So take that into account when you're considering getting this done. Hey, you like merch? I like merch. I like t-shirts. I like fanny packs. Well, I don't really use fanny packs, but I like merch. Check out our merch store. Link is in the description. Plenty of different designs, plenty of different products there, and it helps to support the channel. Now let's move on to things you should consider before getting this done. Your piercer should be experienced, professional, informative, make you feel comfortable, and offer a consultation that involves the risks, what the aftercare commitment's going to be, and etc. They should also evaluate your anatomy to a degree and talk to you about any health issues, dietary issues, any type of medication you're on or anything like that. Due to the rarity of this piercing, it can be very difficult to find somebody that actually has experience doing it. I think that someone who has a lot of experience and is well skilled at what they're doing and has a basic understanding of where the placement should be, where the anatomy is, should be capable of doing this with a little bit of research. But you really need to kind of vet the person doing it beforehand. This is not something you want to walk into a street shop, 2 blocks from the beach and go, hey, I want a rhino piercing, because chances are the person that's going to be doing it hasn't been piercing that long, probably never done one before, and has no idea what the dangers and problems could arise with doing it incorrectly, and it's probably not going to end up straight, which is kind of the point of this piercing. Lastly, does your piercer supply aftercare products? Do they have them for sale, or can they tell you where to get them in advance? Also, do they offer aftercare instructions? Do they have it in the form of they sit down and talk to you for 20 minutes, or do they have a video or something that you can reference afterwards? I always say that you should have at least some basic understanding of how to take care of the piercing verbally, and also in writing, and also some type of video or something that you can come back to if you need it. Now let's talk about the piercing experience itself. First thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a consultation. The consultation, as I mentioned earlier, will cover all the information that you would need to make an educated decision on whether or not this piercing is something that you want. They should cover many of the pros mainly the cons, to give you an idea of what to expect and make sure that your expectations are where they're at. They should, if they've never done this piercing before, they should advise you of that during the consultation. Next, they should give you go into jewelry selection. They should ask you about any metal allergies that you have or any problems with that. Usually, it's basically, from what I understand about this piercing and what my general knowledge of piercing these types of areas of the body, curved barbells are going to work better more out. Straight barbells are going to work further in. So if you're doing a deep one that's further back in the nose and more vertical, you're going to probably go with a straight barbell, and that's going to look different. Curved barbells are probably the more common that you're going to see, and they're done more closer to the tip and done so that the angle will point the horn kind of outward, or the top ball. So as far as threadless or non-threadless, I'll get into that a little bit later, but either or should work with this piercing. Wouldn't be really concerned about security with this particular piercing like I would with an oral piercing. Either of those should work. Now comes the waiver. Waiver should cover any type of medical issues you have. Of course, release you to do the piercing, certify a year of age, give written consent, basically. Also, it should cover things like any type of medication or controlled substance you're on, any pre-existing health conditions that you may have that may cause issues with healing the piercing, etc. Once that's all done, we start setting up. Usually you'll set up a sterile field, as we like to refer to it, even though that's kind of a weird thing because it's not really sterile. Anyway, they'll set up all the equipment that they need. Once that's done, we'll disinfect the area, usually with some type of surgical scrub, and then mark the piercing. Marking with this, it should look straight when you have a mirror at arm's length. The reason why I say that is a lot of times when you look things up close, because nobody's nose and face is perfectly straight, things will look off kilter. But once you get more depth of field or further away, it looks more straight and fits more into the body. With marking this, generally what we'll do is we'll make 2 dots, one at the top, the entrance and exit. In some cases, especially if they're doing it freehand or without forceps, which these can be done with forceps, though I'm a little leery of that, a dotted line will be made so that connecting the 2 dots to give them an idea of how straight it is. Also, it gives them an idea of what that angle should be in depth so that they can make sure to get it straight and hit that bottom hole. This is going through a large piece of tissue. It can be for that reason, it's a very difficult piercing to do because it's really easy to have that needle off just a tad bit. And if you're going through that big, just a tad bit could cause the thing to look crooked or not be placed correctly. So now the inside or the bottom hole or the exit hole, depending on if they go top to bottom or bottom to top, usually with that, you want to make sure it's in front of the nostril entrances. You don't want it so it's so far back where you would put a septum. And it's kind of a misconception that if you go deep and you go further back, that suddenly it's going to go further in there. It doesn't. Basically, what changes is the angle. If you're doing a rhino and it's more of a traditional one with the the thing sticking out straight, you're going to do it more at an angle like so. Now, if you're doing a vertical or deep one, you're going to go further back. You're not going to go necessarily further back, but the angle is going to be different, and the jewelry is going to be longer, and you're probably going to have a longer healing period. This is important. They should measure the piercing area either with a caliper or with the jewelry to make sure that it's long. The jewelry is long enough to fit into the area. You can't do that later, and it might be kind of a pain in the ass to be sitting there with a needle in the tip of your nose while they search around for another piece of jewelry to fit in there. I generally do this with most piercings that are done with curved barbells. Is I always eyeball it just to be on the safe side by holding the jewelry up and just kind of making sure that we definitely have enough room and a little bit of space for swelling. Now, like I kind of alluded to this earlier, they can be done with forceps, usually Bollinger, the rounded sponge-style forceps to flatten out the tissue. I don't know how much distortion this would cause. I don't have experience with this particular piercing, especially doing with a clamp. Otherwise, most of the times that I've encountered it or seen footage of it, it's done freehand with a needle straight through and done. Next up, they're going to put the jewelry in. To do that, they will probably use an insertion or a guide pin that is threaded onto the jewelry or inserted inside the jewelry. This greatly reduces the amount of pain and possibility of jewelry lossage or where the needle separates from the jewelry. Jewelry's put in, closed up. You might notice a little bit of slight bleeding for a few minutes afterwards, some throbbing and aching. Usually that fades in anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. Varies from person to person. After that, you're going to see redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to touch, inflammation, and also it's going to be tender to the touch. That can last 3 to 5 days. The hardest part about this piercing, from what I understand, is not touching it. You know, when your nose itches or anything, you can't touch it. Now let's move on to a little bit about the healing. Average healing time on this is 6 to 12 months, as I mentioned earlier. This is not a short heal. It's a very long piercing. It's going to take a while for your body to produce tissue. From what I understand and a little bit I know about that anatomy, the blood flow is fairly good in that area. So it's not really susceptible to infection or other issues because the blood's there. However, it's so long, it's going to be open for a long period, so that always makes it a little bit more acceptable to infection or other problems. You do need to practice cross-contamination prevention, and that's going to involve cleaning your hands for handling the area, no oral contact, no exchange of bodily fluids on or around the piercing, keeping your environment clean, clothing, bedding, towels, no swimming. Also, keep pets away from it. Don't let them sleep in the bed with you, especially smaller animals that like to sleep by your face. Avoid playing with the piercing or touching the piercing. Excessive movement of the jewelry, etc., is going to cause issues. Swelling and sometimes can last anywhere from 3 to 5 days. Usually occurs the day after the piercing, though sometimes that day, 10, 20 minutes afterwards, you'll see swelling. You can reduce the swelling by sleeping with your head elevated above your heart. That will cut down on the blood flow and cut down on some of the swelling. The biggest thing is avoid contact, and I've said this a few times, or trauma to the piercing. That's going to cause issues. Now let's move on to jewelry. Jewelry should be left in at all times. I very much believe that since this is such a long piercing, it's going to close pretty damn rapidly. Usually longer piercings like navels and nipple piercings, they close faster than other piercings because it's much easier for your body to squeeze that shut in the center and heal it fairly rapidly to the point where you can't get the jewelry back in. So it's definitely a piercing I would suggest only taking jewelry out to immediately replace it. Once healed, or if the jewelry is causing issues during the healing, you should downsize. Go see your piercer, let them do it. Don't try to do it at home unless you have the proper tools. Usually with this type of jewelry, we will use either a threaded or a threadless guide pin, connect the old jewelry, push it out with that guide pin so there's a placeholder, and then put the new jewelry back in. If you don't have that tool and you just take the jewelry out and try to blunt force it back in, you're probably going to cause trauma and damage to the piercing. You also don't want to leave the longer jewelry in because it's more likely to get movement, get caught on things, and become an issue. With any piercing, you want to check the tightness or make sure those balls are well connected on a regular basis. They can fall off or come unscrewed. With threadless, it's more of a situation where them getting knocked around or pulled on or yanked on or caught on something. With the threaded, they just tend to sometimes just come loose for no apparent reason. Do check them on a regular basis. Usually the jewelry on these is either curved barbells or straight barbells, depending on where it's positioned. I have seen some photos of the ones that are done further forward with a straight barbell. I really think that with the type of piercing that people are wanting or affect, curved barbells are usually your best option. You are going to need to stick to whatever style. Drastically changing that long of a piercing in shape would cause issues, in my opinion. It's best to stick with one or the other. And that's one thing you should probably talk to your piercer about before you get the piercing done. Now, advantages of threadless and threadless, or threaded and threadless. Either or should work in this one. Basically, I think threadless is a better option in a lot of ways, just basically because it's easier to change and has generally a pretty wider variety of different ends that you can choose from. However, if you're one of those people like some threaded jewelry and the security of it, go with that. Now let's talk about living with the piercing. The jewelry should be kept in at all times. Check the tightness and make sure the balls ends are secure on a regular basis, and avoid trauma. Even a healed piercing, if you're constantly knocking around and getting it caught on things, it's going to cause problems. It can cause a well-healed piercing to suddenly act up, tears, and you can start this whole endless healing process thing. It can also lead to scarring. So always treat your piercings with respect. Just because they're healed does not mean you can do whatever you want with them. Now let's talk finally about abandoning the piercing. If the piercing is still healing and there are any signs of infection or other problem, always consult a doctor or your piercer before removing the jewelry. The reason for this is we want to avoid the possibility of the infected tissue and fluids getting trapped inside the piercing and requiring the medical attention to correct the situation. It's just one of those things that it's always a good idea if you're having problems, see your piercer or see your doctor before you take that jewelry out. If it's healthy and you're just tired of trying to get this thing to heal, removing the jewelry it isn't going to be an issue. Since it's during the healing process, it'll probably close fairly rapidly, and you'll probably see a limited amount of scarring. Usually with any piercing, the longer the jewelry is in, the more scarring you're going to see, the more predominant it's going to be, and the longer it's going to take for it to fade. So, for example, if you have had it in for 5 years, it's probably going to look open for a while. If you've had it for 5 months and you take it out, it's probably not going to look open for that long. It'll probably close up pretty rapidly. If you have the piercing for a long time, remove the jewelry. What it'll usually do is squeeze shut in the center and reattach, and then it will slowly start to begin to fill from there. You're probably left with 2 indentation scars, but they are on the tip of your nose, so people are probably going to notice it. It's not uncommon to see sebums coming out of the piercing. It's a creamy, cheese, stinky, smelly stuff. It's completely safe. Basically, it's something your body produces. Do not worry about it. It does not mean that the piercing has suddenly become infected. That pretty much sums everything up I have to say about rhino piercings. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Thank you for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you in the next video. Maybe one of these ones.